Fantastic. Brilliant. So welcome everyone. I hope you had a good long weekend and nice way to start the week. See some lovely faces on the workshop, and it's all about people because we're talking today about leadership teams and how to make teams generally more successful and high performing. So just to get our brains in the zone about the subject, I'm going to ask you a couple of questions. And if you'd like to just pop your answer in the chat, or we're a relatively small group, so very happy to perhaps hear you. Just come on, unmute, and we'll have a chat. But the first question is, what examples do you have of a team that didn't fulfill its potential? So a team that perhaps wasn't working as well as it might do. And in that situation, well, what was missing that caused that failure to meet its potential? I say, very happy to hear from any of you who'd like to just talk, or by all means, pop something in the chat, whichever you prefer.
Well, I'm happy to talk, if I may. I've got multiple examples of teams that didn't fulfill their potential over 40 years of working in various industries. And what was missing principally was listening, but also an understanding of what leadership is.
So lack of listening by the leader to the other members of the team. Interesting.
Yeah. Yes, listening. And as I say, a lack of understanding. And a lack of understanding, of course, would spread right across. It wouldn't just be the person who's leading, but other people as well.
And a lack of understanding of what, Helen?
Of what leadership is, what it's meant to be, what it means, what it does, that it gets confused with management so often, to the point that if you ask someone to define leadership, they'll use the word management, and vice versa.
They're often used interchangeably, aren't they? Yeah.
Yes.
And I suppose in terms of the dynamic in the team, if also the team members don't understand what the leader's role should be, then that affects the way they interact with each other, which undermines performance.
Exactly. And also the way they interact with the said leader.
Yeah, interesting. So very much undermining that team dynamic internally. Brilliant. Thanks, Helen. Anyone else got something to share?
Well, I think I'll add to Helen's, and also 40 or plus years of listening to teams underperforming. Inevitably, it's about it's usually a team that doesn't know why it's there and what its real purpose is. Let's have a meeting about having a team meeting. Let's have a team that needs to meet without explaining what it is, what's the problem we're trying to fix,
right,
or address, or whatever it may be.
Now, who are we serving? Right.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that happens a large amount of the time. And the bit that's missing is the clarification, the clarity as to why it is that we should be doing something together, and how it is that we can all bring something to the party. As against, as Helen was suggesting, the leader who says, well, we're going to do it my way. And you can listen, but not do.
Interesting. Yeah. And that very much, we hear often, in the same way as we hear about the difference between leadership and management, there's often a lot of debate and discussion around the difference between a group and a team, isn't there? And this, and that seems to be what you're speaking to a certain extent there, Sim, with, you know, unless we have some clarity of what it is that we're trying to achieve and why we're coming together to do that, we're not going to work effectively as a team. Yeah.
Yeah.
Good. Thanks, Sim. Adam, thanks for popping something in the chat. Would you be happy to speak to us a little bit about that?
Yeah, yeah, I should. I mean, the warning signs are all there. I applied for this job from South Africa and had an interview in Scotland. I flew over for the interview. And before I'd even started, I've never having worked in the UK before, I asked for just a pro forma salary slip to know what I'd be taking home. And my offer was rescinded. And I had to beg to get the job again. I was being too difficult. So I should have really learned from that, shouldn't I? But I was there for 10 years. And our first headmaster was the kind of person who you'd make an agreement with in his office, and then 2 days later you'd find out from someone else that they had made a different agreement with him. Or I mean, it just was awful. And honestly, during my second year there, we used to joke that the real headmaster was actually the head boy, who was 12.
Oh, how
in
interesting.
charge.
Yeah.
And one of the more intelligent human beings I've ever had the pleasure of working with. He was just dreadful. He was changeable. He had nobody's trust, nobody's respect, not even his own children who were at school, which is always a bad idea for a headmaster, to be fair.
Yeah.
But there we go. It was just awful. And it was really unnerving, and you felt unsafe all the time.
Okay, so some really interesting points coming out there around psychological safety generally, trust, values-driven behavior, all of those sort of rules of engagement when we come together as a team. Brilliant. Well, thanks for that. Thanks for sharing, everyone. I'm really pleased with that exercise because it's brought up some of the fundamental things that we're going to discuss today. So on our agenda for this session today, I'm going to hand over to David shortly to talk to us a little bit about the neuroscience of what happens when we come together as a team. And then I'm going to introduce to you our new T4P, Talent for Performance Clarity³ Model that we've developed, which is just a simple model to help us to really diagnose how we're doing as a team and perhaps to prioritize what we focus on in order to improve our performance as a team. And that leads us into some discussion around strategies for developing a high-performing team, and then some summary of some of the practical tips that you can use right away. So following our normal format for these sessions. So without further ado, I'm going to hand you over to David, please.
Thanks, Ali. Yeah, it was very interesting to listen to what everybody was saying about elements of what's missing from the team that they were in and how that feels so intensely uncomfortable. So we're going to look at why. Why is that we feel so uncomfortable? And a lot has to do with that the brain, next slide, Ali, craves three fundamental things. And without it, it begins to get a lot of anxiety and doesn't function very well. So the first one is that it needs and always seeks purpose. It's a meaning-making machine. And if it doesn't find meaning, it'll continue seeking it out wherever it can and get endlessly frustrated if that doesn't show up, if there's no clarity on that meaning. The next one is, as something we've all talked about a lot, is that whole relatedness piece, because again, some people even say that the brain is a social organ and we're geared towards being social. It's one of the things that makes us successful. And if that's missing or damaged in any way, it can be very, very disturbing for the brain. And then the last bit is to look at goals. And again, Sim mentioned the lack of clarity of what's the purpose of and what are we trying to achieve. So again, without clear idea of goals, we really begin to, we're just not using our brains properly because they're off doing lots of other stuff. So let's just have a little look at some of that in specifically. So, as you know, I share this slide a lot, but it's a good reminder of the three key areas of the brain that I just want to remind you of and the importance of these three key areas. So the first one is the prefrontal cortex. And without that, we really aren't effective in the slightest because we don't understand what's going on. We can't memorize and recall important information. We're not very good at decision making. And this is surprising in this case. inhibiting. Most of the time, when we go through our daily lives, we need to be really good at inhibiting distractions, inhibiting that impulse that we have to do something that would maybe distract from us getting the job done. And the next piece that I want to talk about is the importance of what's called the ventral striatum. It's a part of the brain that comes together and is often just referred to as the reward system. And the reward system is a really nice piece that boosts something called dopamine, which is a brain chemical, to help us be clear about the anticipation of, oh, this is worth doing. This is worth getting involved in. And it energizes us, makes us curious because we anticipate a reward. So primary driver of our behavior. And then finally, there's the amygdala, which is a bit like the opposite. It's the inhibitor of our behavior in that we'll either go to, we lose our sense of connection with our prefrontal cortex when the amygdala gets fired up. And it gets fired up when there's a threat, because then we just go into survival mode, that whole fight, flight, or freeze situation. It's the memories of all our threats. So when one thing gets triggered, our brain automatically seeks through our brain for all the memories that we have about when something similar happened or something similar might happen again. Activates adrenaline, we go into fight or flight, and that actually it loses connection with the prefrontal cortex. As the adrenaline goes up, our ability to think clearly and rationalize and think things through drops quite dramatically. So let's just have a look at the importance of this with regards to teams. So as I mentioned before, the purpose part is that the brain needs meaning and motivation. And if it doesn't have those, it'll simply cease to function well. So if you go on to the next bit, if the purpose is unclear, dopamine drops and therefore motivation dips. So we don't have full utilization of our prefrontal cortex. We're not really doing all that key executive stuff around memorizing, understanding, decision-making, and inhibiting. And this is interesting as well. We can appear busy, but disconnected from a real contribution to what the team is trying to achieve. So we end up in that sort of busy hamster wheel without actually being productive. And the key chemical, as I mentioned before, is dopamine. So dopamine gives us our motivation. It helps us anticipate, yes, this is worth doing. And it means that we have that drive to see through obstacles, to overcome difficult things, to work together more closely, because we need that goal to be motivated. So the next one is the relatedness piece, which again, I've mentioned before, is very, very important. That sense of safety and connection to others. And people have mentioned before the importance of that. So with regards to that, when relatedness is low, the amygdala actually gets activated because a lot of the time, if we're not doing a task, our brain's natural state, if we're not specifically doing a task, is to think about all the relationships. It's called the default mode. And that means we're always scanning what's going on with all the relationships, all the things we've said or other people have said to us. And if that's not going well and the relationships aren't going well, the adrenaline levels rise, impairing memory, decision-making, and empathy. And then people get into a protective, defensive mode rather than leaning into it and becoming, contributing to others and seeking out how to work together. People retract and go into protection mode. And that's the key neurochemicals, or involves the key neurochemicals of oxytocin. Some of you may have heard about this. It's a very powerful chemical that's produced during childbirth with mother and child to create that bond. That's where we first experience it. But also more recent research has shown up that in a good team, it'll improve, people will experience and produce oxytocin, which creates a greater bond and a greater trust within the team. So if that's missing, there's a lack of trust, empathy, and a lack of bonding. And then adrenaline, as I mentioned before, is released under threat, linked to defensiveness, blame, and again, the shutdown of our prefrontal cortex. And then finally, to look at goals. So the part of the brain that's needed for goals is also, it's referred to as the anterior cingulate cortex. So if you just show us that. When goals are missing or vague, the anterior cingulate cortex becomes hyperactive and it searches for clarity. So it's a part of our brain related a lot to emotions, making meaning, and finding novelty. And if we don't have clarity about what it is that we're supposed to do, our brain goes searching for it, and it could land on the wrong thing, or if it can't find something that's a clear goal to work on, it just gets very, very stressed, wasting energy and losing emotional regulation. So we'll be more hypersensitive to being triggered or being upset by something that someone says. And motivation is replaced by anxiety or passivity. So we're actually not really doing much. We're looking for ways to, just spend time without being really productive. And this whole piece around competing interpretations cause misalignment and mistrust. Because without a goal, I'll be making up my own goal, but might be making up his own goal, or Ali hers, and Sim his. And then what we're doing is we're actually making up our own goals to satisfy this desperate need, but they're not aligned. And again, the neurochemicals involved in that are dopamine and noradrenaline. So dopamine, as I've mentioned, it drops if we don't have a clear goal, reducing motivation, productivity. Noradrenaline can surge in uncertainty, creating a lack of clarity, and that, raising our sensitivity. And it's, long-term thinking goes out the window because everything's just, what can we do now to try and figure out what's going on? And if you think about it, a lot of what's going on in the world is being triggered by that at the moment, with the amount of, what's going to happen next with regards to tariffs, or what's going to happen next with regards to what's going on politically. So I like this in a way of summarizing what we've just been saying, which is that in complex adaptive systems like teams, misalignment in goals, trust, or roles leads to degraded system performance. And here's the important bit that I really like about this quote. Even when each part is working well on its own. So unless there's this sort of bringing together of purpose, relatedness, and goals, they could each be maybe strong on their own, but if they're not coming together, you're not going to get the productivity and performance we're really looking for. And that's by Patricia Riddle, professor of applied neuroscience, who was leading the course that I did about applied neuroscience. So she's interested in neuroscience that works, and we take a lot of information from her and make it practical for you. So what I'd like you to do for a moment, thinking of brains, is just pause for a moment on that, all that stuff I've just been saying, and just reflect for a moment. And notice what connections your brain is making. Perhaps with regards to teams that you're in, or teams that you've been in, or teams that you're going to be in. And as we're a small group, you can either put your thoughts into the chat or just unmute, and we'd love to hear what you have to say. What comes to your mind?
The first thing that comes to my mind is COVID.
Right.
Because everything you've said, I can relate to COVID, to the state that we were in as a result of, the lack of, we didn't have information, we didn't have an end to it, we didn't, I could go on. And the fight or flight is still present today.
It's been traumatizing for a lot of people who are still in a recovery mode from that because it was so disturbing. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Thanks. Anybody else? Any other thoughts?
I think at the moment, I'm not sure if this, I think it is university-wide, but we're having restructuring and possible redundancies and voluntary severance at the moment. So that's definitely been very unmotivating for a lot of teams. And it, the relatedness part, there's uncertainty on safety and connection to others because we don't know if, we'll be here by the end of summer or not, and what will happen. And there's not really much clarity at the moment. So it's just, I feel like all of those things that our brain needs has been disrupted, and it's been more difficult to get the team motivated and encouraged.
Yeah, and so we're going to talk about that actually, because that's so important with regards to any team going through any change. All of this can be disrupted very, very easily.
Yeah.
I was thinking that we all belong to quite a lot of teams in our various facets of our life. And I think we look for a lot of connectedness and collaboration and psychological safety in our work teams. And I think one of the problems with our societies in general is a lot of the other teams, also due to COVID, but also financial stress and all sorts of reasons. The other teams have sort of fallen away and they've ceased to exist. And so people become quite desperate when they're not finding any security at work because they don't have it anyplace else either. This has all fallen apart. And I think our baseline stress level is higher than it was, say, 6 years ago.
I agree.
I think that the disruption globally in terms of politics and a trend to the right. The latest one, of course, is huge disruption for one of the largest faith sets in the world with Pope Francis's passing, a very moderate pope, and the worries that there will be now a swing to the right.
Mhm.
There's a lot going on in the world, and I think we're all more stressed than we were. And so I think it means that we are less able to think, compute, process than we were.
Yeah,
Very valid points.
and I can't help but take the opportunity to just signal that perhaps you'd be interested in coming back to our workshop next month, which is very much going to be picking up this theme of the current state of uncertainty, chaos, unpredictability that we believe is really making people feel very vulnerable and stressed and anxious. And as a leader of a team or an organization, it's important to be able to proactively manage that state and to try and move forwards, regardless of how difficult things are. So we're going to be talking about that next month. So, good. Shall I move us on, David?
Yes, indeed, because it's really nice to think. I'm glad you mentioned that because everything that we're saying today about teams, that applies to a business as well. So,
yeah. So, those of you, I think you all know us to a greater or lesser extent on the call, and you'll know that we chuckle a little bit. We say we love a 2x2 matrix. We love a model, and for me in particular, I love to have a model that helps me to analyze what's going on, what's working well, where the opportunities are, and to make different connections. And you'll be perhaps relieved to know that the new model that we've created to look at teams is not our traditional arrangement of squares in a 2x2 matrix, but rather has circles. So we're calling it the Clarity³ team model. And it has 3 different dimensions: culture, climate, and context. And we're going to have a look at each one of these in turn. So to start off, let's have a look at culture. So this is really where we're talking about the team's identity, its purpose, its vision, its value. So that's stuff that, Sim, you were speaking to right at the beginning of the session. Why are we here? What is it that we're trying to achieve? And what's really important to us that brings us together as a team? Climate then is about how we operate inside the team, the behaviors driven by those values and what we're trying to achieve, but the behaviors that we expect, the norms, the standards, the agreements between us, which again, Adam, was clearly missing in your example that you were talking about, and the nature of the relationship. So it's about creating that internal environment that enables us to perform well. And then finally, we have the context. And I think this is an area that's often missed when we're looking at team development. Everyone goes away on team away days and looks at all of that internal stuff about, how we're working well together and bringing us together as individuals. But all of that sits in a context, whether it's a team within an organization or whether it's a whole organization within an industry or an economy. And we can go out and out like the layers of an onion in terms of context. And for us to be effective as a team, we need to be clear about our value proposition. So what do we mean by that? It's simply, well, who is it that we're serving? Who are our stakeholders outside the team? What are their expectations of us? And how does that then create for us our goals and our expectations of what success looks like? So this gives us, this arrangement of the model gives us an interesting set of combinations, because if we have just culture, if we've worked on that piece and that's the bit that's working, but neither climate nor context is really ticking the boxes, well, we can be inspired by what we're trying to achieve, but not very effective because we're not working well together and we're not considering our stakeholders and what they need from us. If we're only ticking that climate box, so we're all getting on really, really well together, but we don't really know what it is that we're trying to achieve and what stakeholders need from us and what that external context is, we're friendly, we're having a lovely time, but we're not really achieving anything at all. And then thirdly, if we have just context, we're very driven. We know what the external drivers are and what it is that we need to deliver, but we're not working on all of those internal team dynamics, getting ourselves working well together through our behaviors and our processes. And we're also not passionate about the why behind what we're doing. So we can probably achieve quite a lot, but not nearly so much as we should be able to harness that collective power of a team. Now, to have only one of those would be probably pretty dysfunctional. And most teams, at least, I think, have a combination of a couple of them, maybe with one gap. So, and I think a lot of traditional team building and sort of theory of teams works on this combination of culture and climate. So we're connected with a common sense of purpose and what it is that we're trying to achieve and our values. We're working quite well together, you know, the mechanisms are working well, but we're not necessarily clear about how the external context should be working for us. We're perhaps not clear about what our external stakeholders need, what our value proposition is. And I think this is particularly true for teams whose customers are largely internal. So supporting services often really don't have that clarity of who they serve and what success looks like and how important that is. And that can really make the difference between a team that's performing okay and a team that's performing really, really well. Similarly, if we have climate, so we're working together internally, we're quite tight as a team and we're performing quite well and we're perhaps delivering the outputs, the outcomes, the numbers that people are looking at, but we're doing it without that sense of purpose and values. And that really means that we're performing, but without the energy that comes with passion about what we're doing and why it's important. And then if we have culture and context without climate, well, we've got that vision. We know why we're trying to, why we're here, why we're trying to do something good. And we can see clearly how that fits with our stakeholder expectations and the goals and objectives of the team. So we sort of get the doing bit, but maybe there are some problems in terms of how the team members within the team are actually working together and it's just not gelling. So vision without that vibe of being a team that really comes together and works effectively. So we can see that with any one of these three areas missing, there are some gaps and some potential for us to improve our performance and really to have really high-performing teams. Obviously, what we need is to be in that intersection of the three circles where we have everything. And then we get our very busy diagram with all 7. So what this shows us is that we've got 7 potential states of any team. And it gives us a really interesting model for diagnosing where our team is at and identifying the opportunities to do more and to do better. So with that very busy diagram in front of you, I'm going to move on to something a little bit more brain-friendly, perhaps, and say, okay, so pause and reflect. There's nothing new in that, probably, but it's bringing it together perhaps in a different way and giving your brain a way to engage in a slightly different way about the performance of teams. What do we think? Adam?
Driven but divided really resonated with me, because I think in the private sector particularly, performance is rewarded enormously. I mean, and that leads to people putting themselves ahead of the team because they want to get their bonus.
Yeah.
And I think that that's a huge dysfunction in the private sector, and it's really, really it divides teams. So if someone is particularly driven, they're really good at performance, but they're not in it for the team, then the team is divided and people feel unsatisfied.
Absolutely. And I know David and I immediately will be thinking of some examples of teams we've been working with over the last couple of years, particularly in sort of professional services firms where it is very much about fees and that sort of thing. And we'll see examples of that.
But I think the problem we have as people who are trying to promote better management and leadership is really giving a watertight case with metrics that can be applied to reward teaming and loyalty and trust building over performance, because they're so difficult to quantify. And we really haven't come up with a really clear way of quantifying them and therefore being able to reward them.
Interesting. Yeah, I think it's a very valid point, Adam. Thanks.
I think with charities, they have a powerful vision, and they have an idea of what it is, a clear purpose of what it is they want to achieve, but quite often the rest is missing, in my experience. Similarly, in the church, I have found when I've worked with clergy, that the vision is there, but the rest is missing.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, and my thinking to that went to, I wonder, in the church, as with many other types of organizations, you've also got that drive for, bizarrely perhaps, personal success, and being seen to be the one that's making the difference. So aligning with what Adam was saying, even in those very purpose-driven organizations, we can get that. Yeah.
That's true. Yes. Mind you, I could talk about the church for.
Let's not forget that Justin Welby was an oil man before he became a priest. They are driven at the top end.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah, please don't mention his name.
No, sorry.
Okay, so let's keep it neutral, and we'll any more reflections before we move on? Okay.
Just curious about the connections you're making in your brain. Okay, good. No, carry on.
I just think I wonder whether this is so much more, I mean, blending all 7 elements is so much more difficult in the public sector than the private sector. Difficult enough in the private sector, where, as Adam so eloquently talked about, the drive for performance overriding the effectiveness of a team. In the public sector, and my experience with hospital trusts and their evil approach to performance, where it's all about me. And I do remember one singular arrangement that we had where we were asked to go and find out why this whole organization was underperforming dramatically. And nobody cared. As long as they were getting paid, as long as they were getting their career fulfillment, which was really a paycheck, there was no issue no interest in the greater good or the role that they were, and the management weren't helping.
Yeah.
Because the management agreed with every one of our recommendations and nothing changed.
Yeah.
And so I just wonder whether that clarity and connectedness, and and culture is, it's almost beyond most people's understanding.
I think it does take the ability to have quite a high level perspective on things, which we all find difficult when we're in it. And that's why, to a certain extent, it's always easier for us who are often on the outside to be able to see more clearly what's going on. And that's why I always find, well, if we can capture some of that in a simple model that helps us to ask pertinent questions, that can help to give some clarity. And I know there's a couple of us on this call who've done quite a lot of work with a local authority in the last few months. And I think, interestingly there, what came through very clearly for me was very much that sense of passion and purpose, and a frustration with the ability to deliver in such constrained resources. And that I think undermines managers' ability to manage effectively and be kind perhaps to them at that point. But certainly there was a bit of a disconnect. Good. Okay. So it sounds like it's having the effect we want, which is to make us think a little bit. So if we can use that as a tool to see what's missing, we've actually, although we've got the 7 states, we've actually only got 3 elements that need to be present to give us those 7 states in combination. So if we look at it in terms of what's missing, if we start by saying, well, culture is missing, we're missing the why. So at that point, your leadership team may be lacking a shared sense of meaning and direction. And even teams with clear goals and so that's an external bit, and a strong team spirit will fail to achieve their potential if they don't have meaningful purpose, a compelling vision, and shared values. And that really just accelerates and ramps up the team's ability to perform. So if this is where we're lacking, some things that we could consider doing: co-creating a clear and meaningful team purpose, asking that, always quite difficult, often difficult, but not for perhaps public sector and charity. Why do we exist? Defining our shared values and behavioral expectations. This is where we set the foundation for that internal climate and how we work together. Developing that compelling vision that connects our daily work to long-term goals, giving us that understanding, that motivation of us being part of something bigger. And then using storytelling to reinforce purpose, pride, and meaning. This is where some of this perhaps quite intangible stuff comes to really in sharp focus when we can tell stories. And then recognizing and celebrating the actions, the things that we want to see that reflect and underpin our values. So these are things we can do to build culture, but maybe we're missing climate as well, or instead of. So we're missing the how. And this is where the team's internal dynamics may be holding you back. So even with a clear purpose and solid goals, performance will suffer without the psychological safety for us to work effectively together. The constructive conversations, those powerful, meaningful conversations that really, the difficult ones, that we actually do surface the difficult subjects and the challenges, and we hold each other accountable, and we challenge behaviors that are outside of what's been agreed, and these sorts of things, all dependent upon psychological safety in the team. And that we are focused consistently on that healthy collaboration, so that we're not individual silos of one, but we're working together to be the best that we can be. So when we're missing the how, some actions we can take are facilitating those open, honest conversations about how are we doing as a team? How does this feel for me? And then establishing those team agreements, perhaps the idea of a sort of a team charter type exercise. What is it that we need from each other to work well? What are the rules of engagement? Encouraging constructive feedback and that space for healthy disagreement. We need to be able to have those difficult conversations and to give that feedback. Otherwise, things that aren't working well never improve. And in order to do that, we need to be modeling and rewarding vulnerability, curiosity, and empathy, so that I'm going to make myself vulnerable, I'm comfortable, I feel sufficiently safe to be able to ask for that feedback and to take it on board, to be curious about different opinions, and to be understanding and empathetic towards other people who may be experiencing the team and life rather differently than I am. And embedding those routines that build that trust and psychological safety, making sure we have regular check-ins, opportunities to reflect, and proactively appreciating the people that are working with us. So then our third area of context, where we're perhaps missing the what. And this is where our team may lack clarity on what it's here to deliver and for whom. And even the most cohesive and values-driven teams underperform when they're not aligned to strategic priorities, when they're not clear on the stakeholder expectations, and they haven't clearly defined tangible business outcomes. So they're operating really in a vacuum, which actually removes the potential for us to really get that sense of accomplishment and achievement by achieving something that's valued by other people outside the team. So actions we can take to build context include clarifying who are our internal, within the organization, internal and external stakeholders. So internal and external in terms of the team sitting within the organization, sitting inside an external environment, including our customers. Defining what success looks like in terms of goals, priorities, and measurable outcomes. Aligning our team activities with the organizational strategy and customer needs. It sounds so obvious, doesn't it? But actually, if you've not really thought about who your customers are, particularly if your customers are internal, chances are what you're doing is not going to be clearly aligned with their needs. Creating feedback loops with stakeholders to make sure that we're continuing to be relevant and having the impact that we're aiming for. And then regularly stepping back, taking stock and reviewing whether the team's delivering value where it matters most. So, another quick opportunity to pause and reflect. So what thoughts does that bring up for you now?
I'd like to work for that company.
Excellent. There's quite a lot, isn't there? And it's often missing a bit.
Yeah, it is often missing a bit. But actually, you and David do a stunningly good job in that respect.
Thank you very much. Much appreciated.
Thanks. That's nice to hear. Because it takes effort, right? It takes a lot of willful, mindful effort to go like, what are the bits that are missing and how can we continuously join all the dots and make everyone feel included and hold people to account for what they need to be held to account for?
David, that's exactly what I was just thinking. And I was thinking back to your 7 performance traps, which I know.
Oh, yes.
And accountability. And I was thinking that knowing stakeholder expectations and the metrics that are going to apply, it has to be tied to accountability. And yeah. I think going to Sim's point about the public sector, very often people are scared to hold people account because they know that there are so many other positions available. There's such a stretch on staff, and they can decamp, at least in local government. I'm not so sure about the NHS. There's lots of positions available. They can just leave if they find it too stressful. And I think accountability is something that managers are finding difficult to hold people to.
I think also, just to add to what you're saying, Adam, is that there is a difference between accountability and responsibility. And responsibility as ownership is different from accountability as answerable to. And that confusion, that lack of distinction, can cause a lot of problems.
Yeah, good point. And we can only have that conversation if there's that relatedness, that psychological safety, and that willingness to have the constructive conversation. So they're all so interlinked that unless all elements are there, you're really missing a trick. Because also a good leader or manager even will always say, I'm having this conversation with you because of these stakeholder needs and because of our purpose. And you're joining all the dots together. So I'm not doing this to pick on you. I'm doing this to help you recognize the importance of what it is that we're doing here.
But if we're starting from a point that everybody's stress level at the baseline is higher, they are all so much more easily triggered that it makes this ever harder.
And that's why I think if you come to the next workshop, we'll be talking a lot more about some tips and tricks about how to manage yourself during those intense moments. Because you're right, you won't have your, as I said before, when that gets triggered, you don't have your prefrontal cortex, you're driven by emotions, you're reactive, defensive, and thinking how to protect yourself. And that's just all the things that go against what we're trying to do, which is be vulnerable, be open to criticism, be willing to say I was wrong, I need to change, and feel that your healthy self-esteem is safe enough to be able to go, yeah, I can make these changes because that's what needs to be done to get through this difficult period.
And and what you've done is give us 15 ways of driving stress through the roof. Because I'm slightly facetious or very facetious about it, but I think that, as always, I mean, the summary is super, and the diagnosis is very relevant and very helpful. How do I prioritize the 15?
It's a really good conversation.
And that's very powerful as a process to allow us, because even if you've got 5 people in the room, there'll be, at least 20 different opinions.
Right.
and so on and so forth. So I think that what you've done is create an ability for a dialogue. And as Adam said earlier, and Helen has said, the issue is about where's the priority? What are the what are the 2 things out of this 15 that if I really focus on, they'll make all of the others disappear?
Right. And you can only have that conversation when your brain is able to make those connections. And that means calming yourself down enough. So this whole being able to be calm enough as a leader of a team to have and hold all these complex ideas in your head and still be able to go, right, and what do we need to focus on first? And what do we need to focus on second? Because I also love the saying that if everything is a priority, nothing is a priority, right? Because they all have equal. You got to have something popping its head above the rest to be able to go, that's what we're going to put our effort and attention onto, or everybody's brains will be scanning in doubt and having all the issues that we've just talked about.
David, I have an eye on the time.
Yep.
I'll hand back to you to just do a summary and wrap up, if you wouldn't mind, please.
That's absolutely a good idea at this stage of the game. Yep. In essence, it's a summary of everything we've been saying. So, tips for improving team performance as your mental checklist, because we want this to be simple enough to be able to hold the ideas in your head and to be able to go, all right, what am I doing with regards to culture, meaningful purpose, compelling vision, shared values? How am I doing on those things? And then when it comes to climate, where are we at with regards to psychological safety and that ability to have those constructive conversations that generate consistent collaboration? And we put the word consistent in there on purpose because it's not just about now and then. It's like always looking out for how can I be more than the sum of the parts of the individuals in the team. And never forgetting the thing about what we've been talking about around that accountability piece is understanding the context. What is going on around us and what are the strategic priorities? What are our stakeholders' expectations? And how can we work towards tangible outcomes rather than leaving the room, as we've so often done, I'm sure, in different roles that we've played, where people go, yeah, 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 and yet then everyone leaves the room, but nothing happens. Well, why not? Because there wasn't a clear enough action of what needs to be done next, specific, measurable, and time bound, and a willingness to be held to account for that. So we really wanted to give you that as a summary. And then you know also that we love the clarity matrix, which is our original 2x2 that Ali mentioned earlier. And while this is designed for business, it's really interesting to look at this for a moment and zoom into a team, because what we have here are the dynamics that are always they're in tension with one another, right? There's the people and there's the requirement of what the business needs or the outcomes that the team needs. So back to what you were saying about how that can create a lot of stress, Sim, but also the strategic thinking and performance, actual doing of the doing. And a team needs to be able to manage and navigate these competing demands as well. So when we look at the strategy and the business, the quadrant, what we call business strategy, and you could call this team strategy, again, look, no surprise. It's the same message: purpose, vision, strategy, and culture. It's about understanding what it is that we need to do, what success looks like, how we're going to get there with the strategy, and how we're going to behave with one another on the journey there. And then it's useful to look as well from the team's point of view, as in on the people side, on the strategic thinking, is like, how are we organized as a team? What are we doing and who's doing what? And how can we improve the way that we organize ourselves? Have we got the right people in the team? Have we got the right level of cognitive diversity in the team? What do we need to do? What's the add that we need in order to be more successful as a team? How do we develop ourselves? How do we stay engaged? And then moving on to, again, the conversation that a lot of people have been having on this call with regards to people and performance, it's all about leadership. And okay, teams, maybe even within a team, there are sub-teams or pairs of people who just work together on an element of what the team is trying to achieve, and managing those sub-teams as well. Management of individuals and all the things that we've been talking about. And do the individuals have the capabilities they need to deliver the results? And that's a huge conversation now, especially with regards to AI and how we can complement our work with AI and not be fearful of it, but utilize it to enhance what we do. And then finally, back to the bottom line, which is all about what are the measures of performance. So back to business performance or team performance, we're looking at measurement, we're looking at analyzing that data, making sure we have the right data. We're evaluating and putting meaning to it and saying, okay, this is what happened. Now we can see some patterns within the analysis. What do we make of that? And what can we change leading into the whole change and moving then into strategic thinking again to say what needs to change and how can we move forward?
Oops.
So next steps, we always invite everyone on the call, if you haven't done so already, to complete your clarity score. We'll be sending you the link to do that. It takes 3 minutes to do. You can see the overview of where you're at and where there are some priorities. Back to what Sim was saying, about just discovering a couple of areas that you know are scoring low. You can then see them, you can discuss them with others. When a whole team does the clarity matrix, to get the clarity score, we'll give you a summary for free. We'll just collate the data for you so you can have a meaningful conversation with the team. And also then book a free consultation. Everyone on this call is always eligible for a free consultation. We'd be happy to chat to you about teams within your organization, the specific needs that you have. And as we've already mentioned, to the next workshop, it'll be on the 29th of May. It's at 12:30 on the 29th of May. And it's about clarity in crisis. We're already doing a lot of research on this. We're already putting a lot of material together. We're going to have a very exciting resource for everybody, especially the people who come on that workshop, to be able to help people think clearly and act purposefully during this unsettled time that we're living through. Thank you. That brings us to the conclusion.